You have tuned into The Voice of Medicine, the medical podcast filled with remarkable stories, first-hand experience, important research, and valuable life lessons. Open your mind, relax, and enjoy. Hi everybody, we are back with The Voice of Medicine. Today with a guest from the Netherlands. He's a sociologist. He specialized in the field of drug control and, to be more precise, drug quality control. He works at a specialized institute in the Netherlands, but also did a project in Asia. And he will definitely tell us more about a number of topics regarding drugs use, drug quality. And also, interestingly, he will tell us about the market that was enabled by the rise of internet. So the internet drug market. And I also assume connected to that, selling and buying drugs in the so-called dark net or deep net. I'm very much looking forward to what he has to say. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Daan van Gouwe. Hi, Dan. Welcome to my podcast.
Yes, thank you very much, Mikael.
So, Dan, you are a sociologist and you work for a great amount of years now in the field of monitoring drugs, right? And this is happening in the Netherlands.
Yes.
And I would like to know, first of all, how did you get from studying sociology ending up basically in drug quality field?
It's an interesting question. What I did was when I finished sociology, at that time, we talk about, I think, the early 90s or the mid 90s or so, we had in the Netherlands this mandatory military service that we had to undertake as a male until the age of 25 or something like that. In that scope at that time, and in the Netherlands, you could choose between doing actually military service or doing something similar, but then for the greater good.
So like social work
or community service,
Yeah.
something like that. So I chose for the latter, and then I ended up with drug treatment system service in The Hague in the Netherlands, and so I did that for 18 months or so, and then I enjoyed it quite a bit, but thought that I could do a bit more in a different area, and then I sort of started to work in different fields in the drug field. And basically ended up at the Tremors Institute in the Netherlands around 15 years ago already, doing monitoring, and before monitoring drug markets, and before I was working actually in the treatment field and doing harm reduction and being an outreach worker and so on and so forth. And now for many years I'm monitoring the market in drugs.
Wow. I would say a layperson hearing you speaking, coming from the Netherlands, they would probably think, well, I mean, of course, the Netherlands is a very drug-friendly country. So I don't know. Would you say it's truth? And if so, what is the the special thing about Netherlands that you guys have? I would say more. Now, how should we call it? That you're more tolerant towards, certain substances.
I think it was the case in the hippie times, so in the 60s and 70s and 80s. Maybe still now, if you compare it to, for instance, countries like Russia and so on. But there has been a shift in this thinking about drugs and so on. But I'll come to that later. I think that initially, when the problems with heroin started to become apparent in the streets, what we did was to focus on the user as a person seeking help or treatment. So when the heroin epidemic started, we thought it would be best to set up proper care and treatment for users of those drugs, especially heroin, rather than to incarcerate them. So, and this is probably, it's maybe a cultural issue that we believe in the freedom of, personal freedom of persons to be engaged in things that they like to do, as long as they don't cause any harm to others. So drug use, the issue of drug use, I think we have had a, yeah, well, maybe different attitude if you compare it to other countries in the European Union and abroad. But yeah, it worked for the Netherlands and it still works for the Netherlands. So, based on the idea that, well, drug use is a personal choice and you should not interfere with that as long as you don't cause any harm to others, to the society, or to your neighbors and so on. And then it's just, it's up to you to do that or not, but you should be informed. Best way to live a healthy life, probably not use drugs, but it's basically up to you. So it's different from us, from other countries, and I think it's gone back to the fact that you have this, we have this strong belief in that every individual has their own freedom to, well, to fill in their lives, whether they do that and by not causing any harms to others. So I think still that is the situation, but now we have seen over the last years, the last 5 years, maybe a bit more, that more and more people turn towards a more conservative approach. They are fed up with all these liberal views and these people. They're a bit fed up with that, and now they are focusing more on something else. That it's becoming a bit more strict in general. If you compare that with 20, 30 years ago.
Okay. So you guys basically had a different point of view. You said, well, people who want to take drugs will take drugs anyways, or they will get their hands on the substances anyway. So how about we rather make sure that the framework in which drugs are being taken is safer? So you decided, rather than stopping all individuals, let's take a look at what's out there, and give people I would say more informed background, so they know what they're doing if they want to do it, and maybe second of all, look at the quality of what they are taking.
That's true. But we started off with the fact that we believe that the best way to live a healthy life is not to use drugs. But
Yeah, of course.
we know that many people do so, at least in a specific part of their life, period of their life, they will be engaged in some drug use. And then we believe that the best way to do that is in a safe way. So we should set up things like drug checking, which involved, and other things, in order to minimize the risk for the user themselves, but also for their direct environment and for society as a whole. This is the basic principle still of our policy, is to do it that way. We know we know that some people will use drugs anyway, and we believe strongly until now that the best way to accompany this is to make all those services available, so that people, when they take drugs, they do that in the safest possible way. And this is still a very strong belief in the Netherlands.
So how does this work exactly? I mean, do people just come with, I don't know, a little bag of certain substance, or a bag of little pills to the institute, and they ask you, hey, I bought this from a guy somewhere, or I bought it on the internet, could you test this for me? Is this how you basically ensure the quality?
No, it's a bit of a story, but we started off already back in the 80s, and even actually already in the 60s and 70s. That we started off more large scale in the 80s on festivals and parties, but in the early 90s we formed this network of drug checking services throughout the country, and it still remains until today. It's very protocolized, and basically it means that what people do is they do not come to our institute in Utrecht. We coordinate the drug checking, but they have to go to their local drug checking services, because we have over 30 services where people can go to. You can go there at specific times of the week, and it's anonymous. It's usually free of charge, and you just come in and you said, well, I bought this sample of this ketamine on the darknet or in the streets, and I'm a bit suspicious of the content. Please have it analyzed so that I can use in the most safe way. if at all. And so they do that, and then usually a week later they get the results, because we do a full-blown chemical analysis with all these substances. It's around 50,000 last year, so it's really a lot, and it's on a weekly basis. It's structured, and then after a week, people can call. They get a unique number for their sample, and they can call and just ask for the result. The main thing is actually, one of the main things is not just drug checking itself, but it's also the fact that while doing this work, we communicate with those people submitting samples, and we all kinds of preventive messages. We talk about their drug use, and we talk about their maybe unique treatment or some care, and if they agree, then we can easily refer them to some treatment. So for us, the actual talk with these recreational users is very important, and this is what often is forgotten when we talk about drug checking. That it's a very, it's a very basic thing. You check drugs and you get results. Thank you, bye bye. No, it's not like that at all. So, but we do it in this way for many years, and it seems to be quite effective in our country. Many people use this service. Also, I have to notice that many people do not use this service, but it's up to them. But luckily, many people they are what we call still want to use drugs, but they want to do it in the best possible way, in the safest way. And so they turn to us in order to know the exact content of the substance. And quite often we say, when the results give way to that, we say, well, probably you should not take this, because alongside with ketamine, it also contains some other suspicious substances, and it's probably best thing not to take it. So our advice is not to use this specific sample. And some self-reports suggest, research, including self-reports, suggest that people tend to follow up on our advices. So it's not strong evidence, but at least it's something, and this is how we work.
Mm-hmm. So first of all, I wanna highlight the fact that you are at the upfront. So if somebody comes with the wish to check the drugs that they are about to take, and you might actually, through talking to these people, see maybe early or potential signs of early addictions, or perhaps any kind of other states. And they talk to you, and then you can say, well, I mean, maybe this is not the right way. Maybe there is a need in you to go, I don't know, to some kind of other specialist, psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever, right? Exactly. I think this is very important for people to understand, that you're not just a quality check service, but through that work, you get the possibility to help people, maybe get the first impulse to do something about their problems, if they have problems.
That's right. We're the first persons they often talk to, because they're recreational users. They have never been in contact with professional drug professionals. And so you also have to know, I didn't mention it so far, but you also have to know that these drug checking services throughout the country, these locations, are embedded within care and treatment services for drug users. So you have treatment there, but you also have a drug prevention unit there, and usually within the drug prevention unit we have trained staff there that do the actual drug checking. So for them it's very easy because they know where to turn to for help, so that it's very easy for them to refer a person submitting a sample to the most effective way of treatment. So this is often forgotten, but it's really important. It doesn't happen very often, but it happens. And it's good, because these recreational users, otherwise they would not be seen at drug treatment facilities, because it's a huge stigma for them to enter in the first place. And in this way, you enable treatment for them who need treatment.
Yeah, you're making it easier for them, so to say. It's that's really a cool thing. So let's say somebody comes to you, checks on the quality of whatever they just bought. Doesn't matter if it was on the street or if it was in the internet, and you guys find out that it's not 100% what it's supposed to be, or maybe there is even something extremely harmful inside that thing. What are the next steps?
It depends a bit on the substance. A recent example is sold through a Telegram group. Telegram is a social medium where a lot of things happening, among which drug sales. So one guy bought there in one specific group. He bought heroin. He bought ketamine, but our results turned out that it was actually heroin, which is a completely different substance and really risky situation. So now we're in the middle of identifying the one who sold the sample and the vendor actually on the telegram in order to inform him that whatever he's doing, he should stop with this. And we also have this link with our health inspectorate. So whenever we feel the need to do so, we inform them, and then they have to take upon action upon the specific vendor. It's already 5 years ago, almost six. We do warning campaigns at different levels, but the highest level is what we call a red alert. It's a nationwide mass media campaign against a very specific, targeting a very specific substance. We got through our results a tablet sold as ecstasy containing no MDMA at all, but a huge amount of a very lethal and toxic substance called PMMA, paramethoxymethamphetamine, in a huge quantity, absolutely lethal dosage in that specific tablet, which had the shape and the form of Superman. It was pink, so it was a pink Superman tablet. We identified that through our services, and then we contacted the ministry, and we have this core group Red Alert. So we informed them about one of these results, this result specifically, and we asked them what to do. And then immediately it became clear that it was right before the Christmas season that we said, well, this is very risky. We should actually have a full-blown Red Alert. This is what we did. So we went on TV, on radio, and the media, every media. We communicated the message: whatever you take during Christmas, please don't take this substance because it's absolutely lethal. So I was with my face on national TV, on national news stations, with the logo of the specific tablet in the back. And as a result, this specific tablet became completely unsellable. Nobody wants to use a drug, that could potentially kill you. So it was off the market immediately in our country. However, I remember in that year that Christmas was, Thursday and Friday of the next week. Before Christmas, there were 4 reports of fatal incidents with exactly the same substance in the UK, where there was no drug checking service at that time, and where people were not informed about this specific tablet on the market. And so, we cleaned our streets, but when there's no drug checking services everywhere in Europe, in the European Union, we basically put the problems on the streets of neighboring countries, and this is what happened in the UK. Preventable death.
Mm-hmm. Of course. I mean, by the way, great work, guys. I mean, it's really cool that you identified the problem and you went full on national. With all the possible channels that you had, and you told people what's going on. And once, the public is informed, just like if you have a, viral epidemic or so on, and people just know what's going on, they can behave accordingly. But of course, just as you said, if you are the only country, then of course whoever is selling it, they will just move on to another market. And since they don't have those same systems in place as you have, people first will die and then the actions are being taken. So
it's a sad statement, but it's true, and first people have to die before things would actually change. And on top of that, we're not very proud of that, but we are the number one producer of both ecstasy and amphetamine world speed. And so what happened probably in this case was that a huge amount of tablets were already pressed. They were ready for consumption, so to speak. Then the selling of this substance interfered somehow with our message, so it became unsellable. But it was still there, and it needs to be sold because these vendors, they need to sell, the substance. So they just put it on a plate of another country, and this is what happened.
Yeah, of course. You need to make your profits, right? I mean, if you invest, it's after all, like any other product, it's still a business. So,
but the strange thing is that why would you want to produce a substance anyway, which is absolutely lethal? We don't know. Probably it was a mistake or an amateur. something like that. But we don't really know. It's really strange. So,
Most likely.
but yeah, this is probably an example of how it was effective in our country, and sadly less effective in others.
So when we talk about quality of drugs, would you say that there are specific countries, because not all drugs, of course, are produced domestically. So are there specific countries where you know that whatever comes from there is by definition of a lesser quality and people should really, really be careful? Or do you say it doesn't really matter? It's more like who is producing it and that varies?
Yeah, before a product ends up in the streets, it has gone through a lot of different hands. When it comes to ecstasy, the source is the Netherlands, and so this is also what we see. Actually, is that the quality in terms of purity, for instance, and adulterations of ecstasy has never been so high as at the moment. The ecstasy usually contains only MDMA and nothing else. No adulterations at the moment, and it's really very, very, very strong. But when a product comes from far away, let's say cocaine, coming basically from South America, you see that along the way to Europe or to America, it goes through a lot of hands, and these hands, they want to make some profit as well, and so it gets adulterated, by the kilometer almost. And but there's no countries I could think of that usually have very bad quality drugs. No.
Now, maybe from your experience, through all those years that you're in this field, and also talking to a great amount of people who are also users, what would you say? What is basically what are the three most used drugs? And do they have a specific population or part of population which is rather to take it than the others?
When it comes to the Netherlands, the most used illicit substance, except from cannabis, would be ecstasy. Around 60% or even more of all the samples we see on a daily and weekly and yearly base concerns ecstasy, usually pills, but also powders. Typical public would be young people experimenting with ecstasy, going out to parties, having a good time, and so on. It's very difficult to get addicted to MDMA, to ecstasy. So it's usually what we see. So it's ecstasy. Second place would probably be cocaine. Same group of people, probably a bit older, because cocaine is a bit more expensive than ecstasy. Well, a bit more. It's 10 times more expensive per gram.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so you need some money, but so these are still the same population, but then a bit older. They work usually, or the late phases of their university time, something like that. That's the second one, and the third one would probably be amphetamines, I guess. Also the same range. So all of these three are stimulant drugs that people would take just to have a good time. So it's also makes clear that those people who submit samples to us, the people that we see, are people using drugs at a recreational basis. Heroin, for instance, we hardly see, because we believe that heroin easily leads to addiction, and when you're addicted to heroin, it's very difficult for you to even give away a few traces of the powder, because you're addicted and you think you need everything. So we see party drugs, club drugs. This is what the most thing that we see. Club drugs used by people who frequently go out to parties.
Okay. What about so these are basically the most used, or the ones that you see a lot. You named three which are not so addictive, and I would say by the effects, it rather pushes you, sort of gives you a good feeling about yourself, maybe a certain more of a how should we call it, empathetic connection to other people, since they are used at parties. if we, for example, go to a different direction and talk about the LSD and psilocybin, mushrooms, and this is probably a different part of the population which would experiment with these kind of drugs. And I mean, nowadays they are even sometimes used in therapy sessions. If somebody has a deep trauma and so on. So, do you have maybe some information about that?
Yes, but before I come to that, I have to correct you
Yeah.
a bit because cocaine and also speed, they you can get quite easily addicted to those substances. However, the people that we see, the people that visit our services, are highly educated. They have work, they have jobs, and their drug use has not been so heavily that they cannot function any longer. But principally they are cocaine and speed, they are you really can get addicted to that. So that's one thing. The other one about these hallucinogenic drugs, yes, we see an increase over the years in LSD. 2CB is another one. We do not test mushrooms, so we don't see that any longer, but it's a different group. It's the same, but it's different. Ketamine is also in that range. We call those people psychonauts, people who, like to experiment with these types of drugs. It's quite often done at a home setting because you do not want to be in a trip when you're around thousands of people with heavy music and flashy lights and all that stuff. So you'd like to control that. It's a different group, and we have seen over the years that the number of people submitting LSD, ketamine, 2CB, and some of these new psychedelic drugs is increasing. It's a different kind of people. It's usually a bit older as well, but they are very well experienced users.
Well, thank you for correcting me, by the way. You also mentioned in the talk before the podcast that you would like to talk about the problematic of selling drugs or buying drugs online, right? And you also mentioned the dark net. I mean, I have no idea, so you have to tell us, you have to bring us into this world. I mean, what's going on there?
Oh, really? Yeah. Since we're doing this very specific work, for me, it's, the usual job to go online on the darknet and to look what's happening there. But yeah, for a layman, it's probably something very new. The darknet or the internet in general is a great good. Look what we can do with the internet. It's becoming very the impact of the internet is very strong in our daily life. We use internet all the time, so it's a good thing. But alongside with that, it also makes possible that the drug market itself, they used to be in the streets and so on. Now a part of that market is off the streets and it's online. It's online in ClearNet web shops, so it's like Google index sites where you can buy specific substances. It's on fora where you can buy it. It's on social media like WhatsApp and Telegram where you can buy all these drugs. They are being offered widely. And it's on the darknet. And the darknet is this specific part of the internet, the biggest part of the internet, almost 90% probably we think is the darknet, where you need to you have to use specific browsers to increase your anonymity and so on and so on. So when you're in the darknet, you are more free to do whatever you want than when you're on the ClearNet. It's much more difficult for police to track you, which makes it interesting for both users or buyers of drugs and sellers. So over the years, we have seen an increase in places where on the darknet, where users turn to and vendors turn to buy and sell drugs. These markets are called darknet markets or crypto markets. The number is changing all the time because now police is also very active to block them. But we believe that where there's a demand, the supply will follow. So it will take maybe 1 week or two, and then another market pops up. But anyway, the system is, it's really revolutionary compared to the street markets. And what I usually say is that drug markets have changed enormously over the last 20 years in two ways. One is the emergence of new drugs on the market, so drugs that simulate existing drugs like cocaine and speed and ecstasy. They are different in the molecular structure, and they are being offered widely on the darknet and on the internet. And the second big change is internet as a source of buying and selling drugs. So what we are doing now is to looking deeper into this darknet area and the social media to find out what's going on there. And for a user, for a buyer of drugs, one of the big differences between street level markets and internet markets is that at street you're nobody. When you buy something from a dealer, you have nothing. You just buy it and then you have to see what happens. If it's bad quality, there's nowhere to turn to. On the internet, it's a different story. You buy something, and then especially these darknet markets, they have escrow. So you give your money not directly to the vendor, but it stays somewhere on the platform on which the drugs are being offered. What happens is that you buy something, and then the vendor will send it to you through mail, usually. And upon receiving the substance, as a buyer, you have to fill out a form before the deal is closed. Fill out a form stating, "I am satisfied with my substance, with the substance I sold. I'm not satisfied. I didn't receive it all," and so on. So you have to rate the vendor. It's completely different from the street level. There was no way to rate the vendor. You had your money was gone, and if you had if it was bad quality, well, bad luck. On the internet, it's a different story. So now we say that on the internet, the client is king. The one buying is king because nobody wants bad reviews of the product they sell. Because when they get a number of bad reviews, possible buyers, they will just turn somewhere else. They click on another site or another vendor who has better reviews, and then they buy it from their end. So it's a huge difference. It's and this has changed. This is changing the drug markets completely at the moment. So,
well, what you're essentially telling me very much sounds like I don't know, buying any other goods on Amazon. Just instead of books, I would basically buy ecstasy, and then just like in Yelp, I would write a review about what I got. So it's that it's very different to what it used to be, right?
True, it's exactly the same thing. It doesn't really matter when you buy a trip somewhere or you book a hotel. You look at the reviews. The same with drugs. In that sense, it's a democratic thing. Regardless of the fact whether it's a good thing to use drugs. But if you want to use drugs and you buy drugs, well, probably the internet is for many users a better place to go to than you go in the streets, because in the streets there's nothing you can do when you have bad quality. And what we have done over the years is to look, because we have this unique system I explained you a little bit about. We compared drugs sold online with those sold offline in terms of purity, adulterations, and prices. And although the results were not really sensational, because we live in a very specific country, the results were like this: purity and adulterations were more or less the same. So no statistically significant differences between offline and online. However, the prices of 6 out of 10 substances online were higher than offline. But it was on the Dutch market. The prices in our country for drugs are usually quite low compared to basically all other countries. If you look at the tablet of ecstasy in our country, probably it will cost somewhere between 3 and 5 euros. In Australia, I know it's around 25 Australian dollars, which is a lot more. So, but even so, so if there's no big changes in the Netherlands with online and offline, still people do that. So you might imagine that in countries with a more restrictive policy, where purity in the streets is much lower, people would actually turn to the internet to buy the drugs. So it makes sense. And so since this is the situation, it will never disappear. And now we have this cat and mouse game between law enforcement and users and vendors and so on, because they are very keen now on blocking these markets, which makes sense, obviously. However, we see that once you block one side, another one pops up. And I just get back to this, something I told you earlier on, is that there's a demand for drugs. There is a demand for drugs, and regardless what you do, the supply will follow because it's a very profitable market.
Yeah, of course. I mean, all these things remind me of the American story with the prohibition time. I mean, they made the laws, and the police were looking everywhere, and still, I mean, people got really creative. The Italian mafia back in the days, they got really creative. They came up with amazing ideas how to get alcohol into the country. So where there is, as you say, where there is demand, people will find a way to sell. So
Exactly. And so this is why we focus on demand rather than on supply, based on the fact that we know that people will use drugs anyway. Some people will use drugs anyway, and in a specific period of their life, and then we still believe that it's the best way to deal with that is to give them the best possible information. And we also say that measuring is knowing, because people talk about the darknet and about drug use all the time, that it has increased here and there and so on. But what we're trying to do with many monitors, but also with the drug checking, is to come up with the facts. How many people use drugs anyway? And what we do, for instance, with these new drugs that we haven't really touched upon, is that many people talk about these new drugs are entering the market and they're causing all kinds of problems and so on and so on. Through our monitoring service, we see that there is a demand for these new drugs, but it's still small. And we monitor these drugs almost for, 15 or more years, but we still see that the actual demand for these drugs, with the exception of one, has been really, really low in our country. And so based on that fact, we can basically develop all kinds of policies based on facts rather than on morals.
I understand that. Yeah, I mean, it's always good to have actual data and work with that to know what is really going on. You mentioned also that you had a project going on, or maybe still is going on, in Central Asia. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, this project is called CADAP. It's Central Asian Drug Action Program. It runs really for many years already. I think we started off in 2001 already. Now we are discussing the 7th phase of this project. It's usually 3 or 4 years. The aim of this project is that we share best practice from the EU in terms of drugs, meaning drug policy, monitoring drugs, treatment and prevention, with our colleagues in Central Asia, more specifically in 5 countries, which are Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Kyrgyzstan. These 5 countries, they are involved in our projects. What we do is to share in the best practice from our area with their best practice, because they also have best practice. And talking about these new drugs, they are very interested in these new drugs, and they believe in some countries there's a belief that every second person is using these new drugs. But when you ask how would you know, they have really no answer. They read it in the newspaper, but it's based on ideas and morals, but not on facts. So what we are supporting there in this specific work stream is monitoring how we educate people to monitor drug use in a society in the best possible way, linked to what we know in the European Union already. And it's really a very successful project. It's a huge territory. Problems are quite different, but also very similar. And so we believe that's very good to travel there, every now and then, just to share our ideas and experiences.
Yeah, well, the one thing which I didn't really understand is what caused this belief that every second person would be somehow, a user of these new drugs.
It's not similar. It's not that different from the European Union. Media, some media at least, they write all kinds of things. Some journalists write all kinds of things without looking at the facts. Today and yesterday I was in the media in the Netherlands about specific substances, and it's usually written in a way which is it's scaring people, and it's not based on facts. It was about fentanyl. It was about methamphetamine use in our country, and we see and we believe that the use of those substances in our country, the illicit use of those substances, is still limited. But if you look at the media, how they cover these issues, it looks like the same thing more or less. So we try to work with them in Central Asia based on the experiences that we have and how you could come across those opinions and those very bad written items in the news. So it's not that different, It's different, but it's not that different. We also, what we always say is that measuring is knowing. Before you know something, you have to measure what actually is going on, because people have all kinds of ideas about those drugs coming from outside in your country and they're causing all kinds of misery. But quite often, the reality is a bit different.
Oh yeah, now I understand what you mean, and this is actually a good topic, which I'd like your opinion about this. Why is well? First of all, the term drug is already, I would say, very, the valence of the term is already super negative. I mean, whenever you hear it in some kind of context, it's never positive. And the second thing is, why do you think is substance use such a polarizing topic in the societies? Whereas, for example, alcohol, having also severe damaging effects to humans' body and mind, is usually not that criminalized and demonized.
Yeah. Okay. I'll get to the second question a bit later. I would start off with the first one about the meaning of this word drug. It's interesting you mentioned. In the Netherlands and in some other countries we have this heroin assistant programs. So what is done is that for a few people, really a few, they have to fulfill a huge amount of criteria before they can enter this treatment. But when they do, they get pharmaceutically clean and pure heroin every day. So heroin users getting heroin every day. One who's against this kind of treatment, and many are, they talk about the state is a drug dealer, and you're keeping people addicted, and so on and so on. However, when you talk to those people, and I have done that quite a bit, to those people who are actually in treatment, they don't call heroin a drug. No, it's a medicine. It's their medicine. They are in need of heroin because they are addicted to heroin, and they need heroin, and it's not being used as a drug at all. It's being used as a medicine. So this is how we can put these things into context. And yes, about about the term drugs related to alcohol. It's drugs is negative, alcohol is positive. It has to do also in our society in the Netherlands that I think around 90% of all the people in our country from age 15 to 64 uses alcohol regularly. But they don't want to be associated with they don't see themselves as drug users. No, they are alcohol users because it's done recreational and so on. Whereas if you look at the effects, alcohol along with tobacco are the most dangerous substance at all. They cause much more deaths every year than all those illicit drugs together. To give you an idea, I think around 20,000 people every year die directly because of tobacco use, and I think 2,000 or so because of alcohol abuse. If you look at the numbers of drugs, heroin, cocaine, we do not get above the 200, 250, 300 maybe. It's not to make those things differently, but it's to put those things into perspective. Alcohol, everyone says, well, it's good to drink alcohol, no problem, but it still causes much more problems and deaths than any drug. But if you would say, well, I use heroin on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, just to relax, people would, they would consider you less than a human being. And so it has a very cultural background, for many, many years, and it needs a lot of work to change that perspective. Alcohol, tobacco, and heroin are basically the same substances, and people use that for whatever reason they use that. Many old people, they need from time to time something to lift their minds. Whether it's heroin, cocaine, or alcohol, or jogging, or whatever. And this is the basic thing, but it has been polarized. As you have said, If you would say I'm a regular user of cocaine, people would look at you in a completely different way. If you would say I will drink alcohol in a regular way, because the latter one is accepted, the first one not at all.
Yeah, I really believe what you said is first of all there is a huge historical part in this playing a role like how things developed over the past years, and then the second thing is also the social connotation. So with alcohol, because everybody does it, or well 99% of people drink, and it's okay, then there is no stigma, there is no there is not a problem. But as soon as you have a smaller portion of the population somehow using some kind of substance, and by the way, I think it's also important to mention that the majority of people do not know much about the substances to begin with. I mean, we are not all educated. We don't know what that what these things are made of chemically. We don't know how they really work. We don't understand the biochemistry of the brain, and so there are these negative connotations, and usually people really are either completely restrictive, or they just really, as you mentioned, look at you as a sort of a lost existence.
Exactly, exactly. And this is what we try to not to change, but we look at things based on the evidence, and we have gathered a lot of information about alcohol abuse, alcohol misuse, the risk of alcohol use. We do the same for cocaine and for ecstasy. However, people tend to believe, tend to turn away when you say that alcohol is a bad thing to use, because it would, if you would say, well, we're going to ban alcohol in our society, then it would be a big, social revolt in our country. I'm sure this is why it never has been touched upon. But if you strictly look at the risks of specific drugs, the worst drugs you could take are tobacco in the first place, and secondly, alcohol. And then very far away from those drugs, you come with cannabis and other drugs. So,
Yeah.
so these are the facts.
Dan, thank you so much for taking your time discussing all these things with me. I found very, very interesting, and I believe our listeners will as well. And I would like to close up our session with, I would say, an advice for everybody. Don't take drugs, but if you do, let them be checked so you know what you're taking.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you very much, Mikael.
This was The Voice of Medicine. Make sure you tune in next time, and take care.